use a little bit heavier anchor nymph, and maybe just go from your regular fly line. You don't have to buy a specialized line, even though you probably will later on. And you just go maybe 7 feet of straight fluorocarbon, probably 4X, and you go straight down to an anchor nymph, and maybe have another nymph that's tied off of a tag above it.
That was Pete Erickson describing short line nymphing. Are you getting tired of your nymphing yet? No, not me either. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, episode 118.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Echo Fly Rods, which has been my go-to fly rod for steelhead for quite some time. Go to wetflyswing.com/echo, that's ECHO, to purchase the rod I know and trust. Plus, you'll get a free fly line along with your purchase. The podcast will get a small commission at no extra charge to you if you purchase through that link. This is a great way to support the show and one of the great companies out there. In today's episode, I talk with Pete Erickson, the lead designer for the new Echo Shadow ear nymphing rod. Pete was a member of Team USA for a number of years and breaks down some of the tips on casting, choosing a rod, and fishing for grayling. We hear about the Echo story, a little on spade rods, and what is up next for Pete. Before we get started, let's hear from our sponsors. Since 1977, the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal has long been considered the angler's magazine, with original how-tos and technical articles written by the best trout and steelhead anglers in the West. They are committed to sharing exceptionally written essays, fiction, poetry, and in-depth guides to fly tying and fly fishing. FTJ is one of my go-to magazines, and if you haven't checked it out recently, you can get started today by calling 1-800-541-9498 or heading over to the web at ftjangler.com. So, without further ado, here's Pete Erickson from Echo Fly Fishing. How's it going, Pete?
Good. How you doing, Dave?
Good. Thanks for coming on the show today. We've got some questions to dig in here on. You're obviously a specialist when it comes to the Euro game and rod design and all sorts of good stuff. So we're going to get into some of your background and some topics there. But maybe before we get into all that, you can just give us a little brief intro on how you first got into fly fishing.
I was born and raised in the Seattle area and had a dad that was a big-time fly fisherman. And, I think I probably was throwing my first flies around 6 or 7 years old, or at least up in Kamloops, dragging woolly buggers around. So that's, way back when on that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so that was the Kamloops. You were born and kind of raised in the Kamloops area?
No, in Seattle, but it's kind of a weekend trip. And my dad was, he was obsessed with lake fishing in Kamloops. And so that's basically where I learned to fly fish. Also, kind of Nunley and some of the lakes in Eastern Washington as well. Probably 10, 11, 12 years old, I started fishing for steelhead and salmon too in local rivers, the anadromous rivers. So pretty lucky to have parents that were into fly fishing. It's kind of a hilarious thing that I'm actually a pretty terrible spin fisherman. Mm-hmm. And just because I was given a fly rod from a young age, and everywhere I go that I spin fish, people kind of, they make fun of me like, oh, like a bait caster.
Right.
I'm a terrible bait caster.
So 12, so you were fly fishing for steelhead at 12.
Oh yeah. Young age.
Yeah.
Just swinging flies and lake fishing, doing all that stuff. Is really fantastic area too, to be able to do that. And every now and then our family would get to do a float plane trip up to Alaska when I was growing up too. So
cool.
Yeah, I got to fish some of the rivers up there when I was a kid.
That's awesome. What did your folks do?
My dad owned some steakhouse restaurants in the Seattle area, and my mom was into real estate. So it kind of afforded us some freedom to travel around a little bit and do some fly fishing.
No kidding. So what's the steakhouse restaurants, or is that still that's still going strong, right? Is that kind of a chain or?
Well, they were called Maverick Steakhouses. And,
right.
Yeah. It was a chain of steakhouses. there's still some of them in that area. And that was kind of our family business growing up.
Cool. So you had that going, and then, so when did you start to, get into, eventually you had a little chunk there on the, you got into the Team USA Euro. We've talked about that on the show a number of times. Was that the next thing that, you fished your whole life and then eventually got into that? Was that your first big thing in the fly fishing, kind of as a way of life?
Yeah. As far as river fishing and spring creek fishing, I actually moved to Jackson Hole while I was taking a break in between jobs at Microsoft. And remember, I'm from Redmond, Washington, so you kind of have to work for Microsoft at some point in your life. And so I actually took a break and went to Jackson Hole to ski for a few months and met some great folks and some skiers. And they said, "You're not thinking about going back, are you, without fishing this area?" Because they knew I was a fly fisherman. I'd kind of talked about it. And boy, it's probably maybe a month or two fishing the Snake River and Flat Creek in that area. And I was hooked. And make a long story short, I quit my job and never went back.
No kidding.
Turned into a fly fishing guide and a ski bum. So the area had a hold on me pretty quick. And I started doing some of the nymphing in those areas, and basically, as a fly fishing guide, you do everything. We focus on dry fly fishing on the Snake a lot, but of course, nymphing as well.
Yeah. What year was that when you quit Microsoft?
Early 90s.
Okay, so yeah, early 90s, and that was also right. So Jackson Hole, so you weren't out steelhead fishing; you were just going all in on trout fishing out there.
Yeah, I've made the occasional long drive to the Clearwater in Idaho and stuff, but it was all heavy.
Yep.
Obsessed with stream fishing.
That's cool. And is this where the gang, I think of it as kind of like the Rat Pack, you got, because Jeff Currier, we've had other people on here that have talked about this group out of Jackson Hole, this group of amazing, a lot of the people are big names in fly fishing. Can you talk a little bit about that crew? And is that when it started right there?
Yeah, it was really cool to meet some of the people that were there. I know my boss, Joe Bressler, hired me at Bressler Outfitters, which turned into World Cast Anglers. But just, we saw each other on the river every day, or we're roommates. Guys like Tom Rowland and Carter Andrews. And like you said, Jeff Currier was Jack Dennis's shop guy, and other guides like Oliver White. I don't know if you know him, or
he's
Tom Bie.
Yeah, he's been on the show. Oliver has. Yeah,
Tom Bie. Lori-Ann Murphy was another one that I met right away. Yeah, so just is kind of an amazing area to hang out with those people and fish with them all the time and guide with them too. So I love, it was talk about, being able to learn from some amazing anglers.
No kidding. Yeah. And so you had Jack Dennis, his shop out there, and so you were working for a different shop.
Yeah, I was working for the Orvis shop, which was right down the road.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And then, guiding out of that operation, which is a pretty big guiding service. Okay. Most of the people I mentioned, or a lot of the people I mentioned, were working for Joe Bressler.
Oh, I see. All right. So you got that going, and then you did. So how long were you doing the Euro nymphing before you started to make a transition out of that?
So it's kind of a weird story, but the competition scene, I never really, I didn't even participate in the One Fly, which is a competition in that area. I guided in it, but I never participated in it. And my outfitter, he saw an opportunity on ESPN and thought it would be good for business to send a team there. And I was one of the lead guides at the time. And so they sent a couple of us up to Montana, and we did it was a couple weeks of a fly fishing competition. And so, make a long story short, we ended up winning that competition and got invites to the Great Outdoor Games in Lake Placid, New York. And I somehow got lucky and won that Great Outdoor Games, and was then contacted by the Team USA guys.
Oh, okay. And then that was
that was kind of the deal. Team USA was kind of going through this transition where they were they kind of had a rule that you had to win a major competition to be part of Team USA.
Oh, is that one? Yeah, because I can't remember if it was Devin or Lance. One of those guys talked about how. Yeah, I think it was Devin. He talked about how initially it was just, it was a bunch of people that just went over there and fished, and there wasn't a lot of, they didn't do very well, and then it started transitioning to. That sounds like when you got involved.
Yeah, there was a big push. I know we had I was one of the guides in the competition in '97 on the Snake River, and we didn't do well. And so I think that the board of the Team USA kind of made a decision to go for some people that have had competition experience. And my competition experience was just, hey, go do this. And, I kind of got lucky in some of these competitions. And once I was on Team USA, then I learned to Euro nymph. Like we traveled to Poland and met the nymphing guru Vladi and stayed at his house and had him train us. We called it Vladi Boot Camp. Jeff Currier will tell you all about it. Yeah. But and so, that was probably late '90s, and that's when I started picking up a lot of the Euro nymphing stuff. It was super early in the game. We weren't even using long light rods. We were using 9-foot 4-weights and stuff.
Oh wow, and that wasn't even that long ago. I mean, that's only 10 years ago. Or 10 or 11
so
no.
No, well, no, late '90s.
Oh, late '90s. Yeah, not late '90s. Yeah, so it was a little.
I'm dating myself right now. I better be careful.
That's right. So late '90s. So basically, 20 years ago. So you get in strong into
20 plus. Yeah,
20 plus. Okay, and then Euro nymph. You're in. How long were you on Team USA?
Let's see, a decade. I was on Team USA for a solid decade before I had some little kids running around the house and decided to quit traveling. It's a huge travel commitment.
Yeah.
So, I had 10 straight years and went to, I don't know, 5 or 6, probably 6 world championships.
Okay.
So it was kind of fun, kind of cool. But that's where you can't really do well in the competition scene if you don't have that side of things, the Euro nymphing side. So you pretty much have to pick it up, learn it or perish on that competition scene.
Yeah.
So that's when I got into Euro nymphing.
Okay. All right. And then, in the late, I guess, 09 in that range, you start getting out of it. And what was your next? I mean, when did the Echo, was that the next big thing when you started designing Euro kind of nymphing rods or for Echo, or how'd that all come to be?
I was doing a casting competition down in San Francisco and at Golden Gate, and I was down there with my buddy Brett Bishop, and who's captain of Team USA. He wasn't involved with Team USA at the time, but we were doing a unrelated competition down there, and I had met Tim Ray Jeff before, and we had lunch with Tim and his brother, and we started talking about our fishing experiences and stuff, and he was like, I'd be really curious to design a nymphing rod for my company. Could you do that for me? Could you help me do that? And so we started talking about it and working together on it, and that was over 10 years ago that we put the first rods out.
Wow. Well, so there you go. So now Euro nymphing. So, and that kind of coincides. We've talked to not only Devin, but others have talked about Euro on this. So that was 10 years ago, and now it seems like everybody's got a Euro nymphing rod. Is that the case, or do you see a lot of companies with that going on, or do you think it's kind of blown up here in the last few years?
It seems like I still guide a lot. I probably guide 50 plus days a year in the summers. I'm a school teacher during the winter, so my guiding is mostly in the summers. Yeah, I'll literally get a call saying, I don't want to do traditional fishing today. Let's park the drift boat on the gravel bars, and I want you to teach me how to Euro nymph.
There you go.
I mean, it could be just a random angler from anywhere in the country that's just seen it and is curious about it. And so then, of course, I'm like, well, we need to have the right gear, and you can do it with a traditional 9-foot 5-weight rod, but you realize the benefits when you have a long light rod, like a 10-foot, 10.5, or even 11-foot, 3-weight.
Yeah, that's right. And,
which sounds crazy.
Right. And the real soft tip. And do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the rod that process of designing the rod? I mean, how do you, maybe talk about what your role was in that process of creating that Euro nymphing rod.
Well, when I first traveled to Poland and Europe, I mean, like we said, that was a long time ago. Even the Euros were using, maybe a 10-foot 5-weight lake rod, from Sage or whatever, and had a fighting butt on it, and there weren't really Euro nymph rods out way back then, and so the rods were a little heavy, and the obvious thing was that the length was a huge benefit. But everyone was just kind of dealing with all the other actions. Basically, if you have a lake rod action, that might not be optimum for, Euro nymphing with tungsten bead heads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
and why is that? Why is that the lake rod isn't? What's the difference between that lake rod and the perfect Euro rod?
Basically, a lake rod's going to have an action that it might be a more powerful rod. It might not load certain types of leaders. Probably the biggest thing with a lake rod is that it's going to be sized up power-wise. So, most of the lake rods that I compete with are 6 weights, 7 weights. I even compete with 8 weights.
Oh, wow.
So that'd be the first big deal, is that we had to start trying to figure out how to make the rods lighter, because they're hard to hold in your hand if you have a big heavy rod.
Yeah.
You can't take a 10-foot 7-weight steelhead rod and hold your arm up all day like that.
Right.
So
and you have to hold for the most part, you're holding your rod up as much as you can, as high as you can.
Yeah, I mean, if you're competing and you're trying to get that reach and everything, you would do that. Out, kind of casually fishing, I don't always hold it up there.
Gotcha.
Just trying to relax, and the rods are long enough now. But so the action, back to the actions, is you want the rod sensitive, so they're lightweight. You also want the rod to potentially load a long leader.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's gonna have to have some finesse to it. There are a whole bunch of things that we went through on the first Shadow series, which is the first rod that I designed. She's probably 10 years ago now. It was called the Shadow PE, and with my initials on it, which was kind of embarrassing.
Oh yeah, right.
Tim's like, let's put your initials on it. That's what we do here. And so when we put that first rod out, we did some experimental things. We made it a little faster than some of the rods that were being used in Europe, just for accuracy and speed. And the rod was actually pretty successful. It was a cool thing to put it out there. But the next rod we did was called the Shadow 2, and that was probably about 6 years ago now, somewhere in there. And that rod was really well received, and in fact, it's probably selling better now than it was when it was released, if you can believe that. Which kind of shows you that this thing is kind of a monster that everyone's interested in. Mm-hmm. So, it was a shock to me, because I thought it was just kind of in that realm of stuff that I learned in Poland or Czech Republic from some of those people. But when you bring it out to our Western rivers, or basically any rivers in the United States, and you have a successful day doing it, it turns people on to the whole thing. Yeah. And there's several reasons why. It's you're in contact with the fish, and it's really different from fishing with an indicator. It really is. They're two different creatures.
Yep. No, it's and it's funny, because I grew up fishing, nymph fishing, and I never ever said Euro nymphing, but we used to basically use a typical 9-foot 5-weight, no indicators ever, a little split shot, and a normal kind of a leader, usually a 9-foot leader, something like that, and
tapered leader.
Yeah, and a tapered leader. Yep. So those are some things. But other than that, so I guess it was kind of similar, because I always had a tight, for the most part, tried to have a tight line on it, and tried to, do you feel that? What else is the Euro? I know it's obviously super effective. How else is it different? what are the big things that make Euro nymphing what it is?
Well, like I said, the gear has really changed things with the Euro nymph lines, and these rods are incredibly sensitive now.
Oh, right.
There's many things there. The flies are incredible. You got, I didn't see anybody using jig hooks with tungsten slotted beads and stuff. I was using that on the Snake River guiding 12 years ago, 15 years ago.
Okay.
It just killed the fish. So the gear is different. I would say that most, like when you're talking about high sticking, that's what most people are referring to.
Yeah.
Stuff that, I'll hear that if I'm doing a presentation, like, my great granddad's been high sticking for 200 years in Colorado.
Yep.
And you're like, yeah, absolutely. There's probably no original fishing techniques. They're all kind of, blended together. But usually when I see someone that's just kind of traditional high sticking, they're not always in full contact with the flies. And that would be one difference that I've noticed. And once again, going back to the fact that it's a jig hook and you can,
that's a huge
kind of make it go off the bottom as far as not getting hung up.
That's right.
But there's a lot of similarities to a lot of the old styles. So I mean, and to try to say that one's really heavily unique over another is kind of tough to do.
Gotcha.
But I'd say the gear and probably the fact that the leaders are incredibly light too. I mean, what type of leader were you using?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, I used to build my own leaders, and we'd use whatever Cortland or some typical leader. But yeah, sometimes you just put a pre custom 7.5 foot or 9 foot leader on there and just go with that. Down to 5X, usually 5X.
Yeah, I was going to say 5X. Yeah, that was one of the big things that I noticed too in Poland. It's like, wow, we're going to be using 6X or even 7X with 7X. These nymphs. Yeah, and it's so that it has less drag on
7X with a normal size. Like how small or how big would the nips be with 7X?
You'd be surprised. You can get away with fairly big nymphs with 6 and 7X, especially with how improved all the tippet material is.
And how do you avoid, from the dumb person, look at this who hasn't really done the Euro nymphing, how do you avoid that thing where you make that cast and, the rod when you got too much weight and your leader's too weak and it just makes this like almost like a, what do you call it, where you're almost like slinging, that thing when it's really, but how do those, is it just, that's what you're saying, the action of the rod takes that all out and it allows you to basically cast a leader with a heavy weighted fly?
Well, yeah, you can't. I mean, it's true. The longer rods load up better for those situations, and there are two kind of situations in Euro nymphing. One is where you're actually shooting. I call it shooting, where you're shooting the bead head.
Yeah.
So that's why people will say, hey, you need 3.5 bead, and you're going to shoot it. There's other ones where you actually have a semi-tapered leader down, where there's a top part of the leader that's pretty stiff, like Maxima.
Yeah.
And then it's easier to load at that point. And then the weight becomes a little less significant at that point. So you can actually, you're kind of actually throwing a loop with that leader because the leader's built that way.
Yep. Gotcha. Okay. And then, the rod, so how you guys made the rods a little faster. Can you talk a little bit about that process, how that, your part and how that works? We've talked a little bit about rods, in past episodes, but just how you take a rod where it's at and make it a little faster. How does that come to be?
Yeah, well, so you got to have an idea of kind of what you want, obviously, to start with. And then, we work as a team at Echo. We'll actually take some rods and go out and test them from, maybe our past rods or other industry rods and try to figure out what type of new action that people are after. We use deflection boards to see what the actions of the rods are. And then we create prototypes, and then you literally have to go, fish your butt off with the prototypes and take copious notes on everything. And then keep working prototypes until you finally dial into exactly what you want. Oh, go for it.
I was just going to say, how many hours on average, or just guesstimate, would you say you put into one of those rods that you're testing out before before you go back with your notes to the back to the lab?
Oh, that's a good question. And then the poor souls that I bring out with me too, friends of mine, that are Euro nymphers.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we go in yet?
Yeah. Are we talking hundreds of hours, or are we talking
hundreds of hours.
Hundreds and hundreds of hours. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll notice a kind of a funny thing. I think Tim's got it somewhere in the marketing literature on the Shadow X, which is our latest rod that just came out. It says something like, by far, without a doubt, unbelievably, the most developed rod we've ever put out, which means that we tried all these prototypes, and ultimately I'm the lead designer, and so it's my call. And I was like, no, we got to kind of get it to have a little more action here, a little stiffer tip, little that type of thing. And so we did tons of prototypes, and before we finally got exactly what we wanted. So the process it can be tedious, but at the same time, I really enjoy the process of designing a rod.
Yeah, cool. I wanted to get into a few. I mean, sounds like you're a decent caster. You maybe have a few tips you could shed on as related to Euro nymphing and kind of that game that we could talk about. I want to dig a little more of that. You noted when you said Tim Ray Jeff. He hasn't been on the show here, but his name pops up so much. Whether it's winning casting competitions or how Echo seems to be doing really well. But he seems to be, I don't know if he's out in the forefront or whatever, but can you talk about, what you've learned from Tim over the years? It seems like he's quite a powerful figure, so to speak.
Oh, he really is. He and his brother, Steve, Ray Jeff, have, these world-class casters that have done all these casting competitions since they were little kids, basically, growing up in the Bay Area.
Gotcha.
And so, unbelievable casting instructors and casters as far as just every type of casting that I've ever seen them do. And amazing fisherman too. Going out fishing with Tim is you learn something every time that you go fish with him. But I would have to say what I've learned most from Tim is probably how technical he is. He's an engineer, basically a material engineer. And so, when it comes to design,
he's a material engineer. He's actually an engineer.
Well, actually, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure if he's an actual material engineer, but I'll have to ask him about that. But I think he has a background in materials. I know he's been a rod designer forever. With Steve. So, when he first started talking to me about rod design, he had to talk to me about all the materials and basically just the whole process. It was pretty technical, but I ate it up. It was great. I loved it. And so, he'll also you'll be out fishing with him, and he'll look over and he'll give you a casting tip that's an incredible casting tip. Like he'll see something in your casting and go, hey, you might want to do this or do that. And you sit down and think about it.
What's a good example just for somebody sitting at home for a casting tip? What is it seems like, for example, a tailing loop, right? You have these things that people do and things. I mean, are there any general casting tips that that are out there that you just hear a lot of that, I mean, you're not really necessarily a teacher, but you've been a guide, so that you've probably taught lots of people how to do it, right?
Oh yeah, I was a casting instructor for a long time myself.
Oh, nice. Okay,
not on Tim's level, but I remember one time I was at his house and he was helping me with casting, and we were working on some stuff. I think I was getting ready to go to the second grade outdoor games, and I think we had a distance part of our casting deal, and I was like, hey, how do I get a little more distance? And basically he just said you have to follow through with your double haul. It's as simple as that. You're not following through with your double haul. And I didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
He's like, finish through with that pole hand when you're casting. And I did it, and it's like, it's instantly
down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And stretch that hand out. And I was like, oh, like this? And I look, and it's another 5 or 10 feet.
Kind of like the Echo logo, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I remember looking at the logo later on and going, "Oh yeah, okay,
that's cool." Or the Joan Wolfe sort of thing. I heard that image, that picture of her doing shooting the line out there back in the day. That's cool. Okay.
Exactly.
So so basically, you have this guy that you were, you kind of studied under, and he taught you a bunch, and you're a casting instructor as well. And can you go into a few if we stick on that Euro? You think of that rod, and what is the best rod? If you think, is it 10.5, 11? I mean, what is the perfect rod if you had to pick one?
Great question. I would say personally, I kind of like the 10.5 3-weight in a lot of the rods, but I know a lot of the competitors like the 11-foot rod too.
Okay.
It's usually in a 3-weight, or
and
it could be in a 2-weight.
There's no 11.5 foot.
No, not yet. Not in the industry.
Yep.
One of the things with the design process is you're kind of restricted by just the physics of the material, and so when we first started doing the 10s or 10.5s or even 11-foot rods, they're kind of tip heavy and noodly, and it was a really tough thing to get a rod that felt light in hand and crisp.
Yep.
And then just basically with the resin technology and everything else, it's been we've been able to get that in the last like 5 years. So you actually you don't really lose anything by going up to 10.5 or 11 foot now on a lot of these rods, especially the Shadow X. It's really, really light in hand. I think all around 10.5, 3 for me, just because, it seems a little more accurate than an 11-footer. But at the same time, you lose that extra reach. And reach is really, really important with European nymphing. That even an extra 6 inches can be the difference in your presentation.
Yep. Okay. So basically 10 foot or 10.5 foot 3-weight is the good. And then you have your stuff, and then line, I guess, is you kind of get a line that coincides with that. I mean, once you get on the water, do you have a few tips you might give somebody if they're new? Say they didn't pick up a guide trip with you, but they just have their rod and they're out there. Is it just like you grab your 9-foot 5-weight, same sort of thing, same sort of casting? Or are there any other special tips?
Yeah, I mean, as far as basics go, anybody can really have fun kind of going out and trying that stuff. You could take a 9-foot 5 out there. What I would recommend is you kind of do what we call short line nymphing. And that would be where you use a little bit heavier anchor nymph, and maybe just go from your regular fly line. You don't have to buy a specialized line, even though you probably will later on. And you just go maybe 7 feet of straight fluorocarbon, probably 4X, and you go straight down to an anchor nymph, and maybe have another nymph that's tied off of a tag above it, and just get out there and actually start kind of practicing your lob cast. We call them lob cast because, like you said before earlier, I think you are literally loading that fly.
That's what I was trying to think. Yeah, lob is instead of the line. Yeah, you're lobbing.
Yeah, it's a lob cast. Yeah, and it's really easy to start. And of course, you got to use your legs and move around a little bit. That's one of the things that the short line nymphing is big for Grayling and Poland. And so, because you can kind of move in on the Grayling, and they'll settle back in around you. And so, short line nymphing, is one of the games over there, but it works pretty well for trout too, especially in certain conditions where trout, are near you, and you figure your rods, even if you have a 9-foot 5, your rod's 9 feet away. So you can do lob cast and get down there to where the fish are. That's a really awesome basic way to do it. And the success is usually instant. You're like, wow, I had no idea these fish were this close to me.
Right. That's cool.
So yeah, go out there and do short line nymphing with a lob cast is a great way to start.
Okay. And that's just, like we said, you got so much weight on there. You're not casting, 30, 40 feet of line sort of thing. You're fishing. It makes more sense to start right in close and work your way out.
Absolutely. And then thicker tippets too, because they get tangled less. That kind of spooks people off if they're starting with 5 or 6X
right.
They've got tangles. They're like, oh, I don't like this style of fishing.
Yeah.
If you go down to 3 or 4X, then you're going to tangle a lot less in the beginning stages of it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, cool. And on the rods, sticking with the rods, I know Echo, we've talked about this with a few guests on here about how durable the rods are. Can you talk a little about, Echo and what makes them such a durable rod? And is that something you guys still have with the Shadow series?
Yeah, well, one of Tim's, the foundations of the company was durability. and break strength is basically what we talk about when we're designing the rods. In fact, I was just at the factory a couple of months ago, and we had all the reps there. It was really kind of fun. And Tim goes, "Hey, Pete, go over and grab this rod and see if you can hold it while this winch cranks it down and to break it."
Yeah.
And, I had a big mask on and stuff.
Right.
And the rod was so far bent over that it actually was coming down a foot or two below the reel seat that I was holding.
Jeez.
And then my arm started shaking. Like, it was actually, I couldn't hold it longer than that. And so we eventually put the rod into clamps and then kept pulling it down until it finally shattered. And then you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot from where all the breaks are. It's a real technical deal. But that's been a focus of Echo from the beginning. Super durable. Yep. And you just you build the brake strength into it is what you do.
And how do you build that? Like, how would you build? How would that rod be stronger than, say, a rod that isn't? What's the difference? Is it just the type of material you're using, or?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically the thickness of the graphite, the walls, your tapers, everything kind of plays into it. But every rod designer has to decide what brake strength they're going to do. And so, if you go with too strong of a brake strength, then it affects other areas of performance, right?
Yeah.
Like the weight and all that type of stuff. So it has to be a balance. You were saying with the shadows, but anytime that you do long light rods, like the new Shadow X, it's not going to be as durable as a 9 foot 7 weight steelhead rod.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Because it's what I call them long light rods. So you're pushing kind of the design limitations. And
Gotcha.
So you might have a rod that, let's say that you really, you decide that you're going to reef on a snag, like a log. You could possibly break a long light rod doing that. Whereas maybe, someone who's doing it with a 9'5" rod, it might not break in the same situation. So it's all kind of a balancing act.
And now a quick word from our sponsor, the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal, your seasonal magazine covering fly tying, fishing destinations, how-tos, short stories, and more. Here are a few examples of what gets me fired up in this year's winter edition. Check out a short story by Deck Hogan on big flies for the OP. Get the inside scoop from Dave McNeese and his technique on dyeing fly tying materials. We also head over to the North Umpqua, then back to the Green River and over to Gary Lewis on the Green Butt Skunk. Has a little story on the history there. Pretty cool stuff. Lots of additional content in every episode of the journal. So head over to FTJ Angler and subscribe so you don't miss any of the tips, tricks, and stories in the next issue. That's ftjangler.com to get started today. And if you mention you heard about this from the Wet Fly Swing podcast, we'll figure out a way to give you some little bonus. That would be amazing. And I will follow up with you on that. Or you can reply to me at dave@wetflyswing.com and let me know you subscribed. Okay, back to the show. Yeah, I wanted to touch a little more on the Echo story, if you know it, just how it started. I think it's been, I'm not sure the exact how many years it's been going, but yeah, before we get there, do you would you be cool jumping into a little bit of a grayling kind of, that's something we haven't talked on here yet about, grayling fishing and maybe how it's different from just fishing for rainbows or brown trout. Is that something we could dig into a little bit?
Sure. I can talk about my experiences on competing in Europe, and that's where I learned about grayling.
Yeah. And is that always a species? Is it usually grayling or one of the species you're going for, or does it matter whether you're catching grayling or what are the main species if you had to say the top few that you guys are going for?
It's just trout and grayling usually.
So and rainbows or browns or.
A lot of times it's wild browns over there. Browns, there are rainbows in Europe too.
Yep.
But like my favorite competitions are wild browns and wild grayling.
Gotcha. So those are the two.
And they're usually they're mixed together usually.
Oh, okay.
In a beat when you're doing a section.
And similar to like browns and where you have browns and rainbows, browns are definitely taking differently. They're feeding differently. I mean, graylings, are they more similar to a rainbow or a brown?
It's probably neither. They're kind of their own special beast. Like you can actually kind of tell whether a person had trout on their section by their score, or whether they had grayling on their section.
Okay.
So when someone's coming up after the scores are done, and we're competitive anglers, so we're like, hey, how'd you do? How many did you catch? They're like, oh, I caught 14. Well, you're like, oh, he had trout on his section, as opposed to maybe I caught 2 grayling on my section that were, or it can be the other way around too if grayling are eating on top. So they're different creatures. I mean, the Europeans that I've fished with and have helped train me in those situations, I've got to fish with them, and they've been guides for Team USA. They call them El Profesor. They're incredibly smart fish. Yeah, cool. The European grayling are especially wily fish.
Have you fished for grayling up in Alaska or anywhere up north?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny story. I've spent a lot of time on the Nushagak and some of the rivers up there, and I've got pictures of giant grayling with a skated mouse stuffed in their mouth.
That's sweet.
And I send them to my friends in Europe that will spend an entire weekend trying to catch an 8-inch European grayling that is impossible to catch. And I'm like, oh yeah, we could just
I guess that's
skate
Alaska.
ice on top.
Yeah, that is Alaska. So, it's almost like any species, right? Even the rainbows, it's kind of Alaska's a little bit of the anomaly.
Yeah, Arctic grayling, they tend to be kind of dumb in Alaska.
Yeah.
Alaskan grayling.
So Europeans a little differently. And what are there a couple of flies that I mean, I guess you guys are using the same sort of stuff, kind of Euro style, but are there a couple of your go-to flies you throw on there for grayling?
Yeah, I mean, most of the Perdigon flies. I'm sure Lance and Devin talked about that. Those things are staples a lot of times for grayling, as well as the wild browns, like in Spain. There's a lot of crossover with that, but a lot of times grayling will they're big into hot spots.
Oh, okay.
I remember bringing out some hotspot flies, 15 years ago with fishing clients. They're like, what are these weird things? You didn't even see hotspots in the fly shops and stuff.
No.
And they were such a trigger, red tags and stuff like that. They were such a trigger for grayling that once I got used to fishing them in Europe, I had to fish them over on the Snake River and our rivers, the Green River and stuff over in the Rockies. So those flies would be big for grayling. Grayling really examine the flies closely. Grayling love to eat dry flies as well. That's where I really got into CDC. CDC is a huge advantage for grayling. And of course, I let the CDC transferred over to our waters beautifully. But yeah, the grayling flies are kind of unique in that way. They have hot spots on them, and they're usually low profile and small works. One great tip that I got from a guide over there in Slovakia was I was fishing for grayling, and he was out fishing me, and I was kind of frustrated. I was watching what he was doing and trying to figure out what was going on, and he grabbed my flies, and he's like, "Oh, your hooks are silver." I was like, "Yeah, that's all I have in my fly box." He's like, "No, you need black hooks."
Oh yeah.
I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, the grayling are they want to eat black hooks." At least on that river,
no kidding.
And I found that to be true. Yeah. So I just brought a Sharpie with me and colored all my hooks.
There you go.
I literally could tell the difference with grayling. So that's they are that smart as far as presentation goes.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So, and it sounds like your background is, obviously the Euro game. Do you have any other people out there that, influenced kind of you along the way that were big influence, like Tim and others that are out there?
Yeah, I would say the Polish world champion Vladi, and he was kind enough to take, guys like Jeff Currier and myself and a lot of the Team USA guys and just train us. Take us to the San River in Poland and say, here you go. Here's how we do this here. And so huge influence as far as learning a lot of the European nymphing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah, one guy that really kind of took me under his wing was Jeff Currier, because he'd been on Team USA a few years before I got there, and I think he was my roommate in Spain and stuff, and kind of showed me the ropes.
That's right.
That was a huge, awesome thing.
I think he was the first one in Team USA for the U.S. to actually win a medal, right?
He was. That was in Spain.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was kind of one of our first really good teams where I think we had a top 5 finish maybe, maybe the year or two before that the team was finishing in the 20s.
Yeah.
So It was a big difference with the kind of a different group of anglers. So yeah, he was a huge influence in that.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, let's take us back. So basically, let's think of the Euro game. We'll stick with the rod. We're going for let's just say we're out there in Europe, going for grayling. Do you have a couple of tips you might provide if you're on the river and maybe fishing, you're not doing that well, you're not catching any of those fish, how you might, get into a couple of fish?
Yeah, grayling are really interesting. What they do is they pod up. So you'll find a pod of grayling. That's the first thing, is you search until you find them, and then slow down.
What's a pod look like? I mean,
because
you're just polarized glasses.
Well, it's like, I always call them herds. I know that's not the proper way to say it, but I call them a herd of grayling. You can even. There was one time in Slovakia where I knew that the Italian angler before me had only caught 1 or 2 fish on this section. And I was like, oh boy, I'm up against it here. And I kind of figured out where he probably went. And I could tell just because there's evidence of stuff left behind and footprints and everything. I could tell where he went. And I settled in on this pool that was down at the bottom. And it was by a busy bridge and everything. And I figured, well, maybe there's some grayling down in there. And I actually started nailing the grayling on a dry fly. Like they would come up, need it. They weren't rising, but they would come up, need it. And I ended up just, catching, 35 grayling in 3 hours. And they were all there. They were all sitting in that one spot.
Yep. Wow.
And after I kind of burned the hole out, I actually went down a little bit lower and I walked a lot of the grayling back up into the hole. Like I could see them kind of zipping around, and they settled back into the hole, and I actually caught a few more in my last 20 minutes. So that's kind of a weird little anecdote about grayling, how they are. They'll settle back into their spot, and you can kind of move in on them and try to catch them again. Huh. That said, I mean, I've moved into a lot of spots where I knew grayling were and just got my butt kicked.
Yeah.
In Europe, a lot of times.
Is that different from trout? I mean, when you spook trout, do you think they kind of just what do they do?
Yeah, the trout sections, especially like the wild trout sections in Europe. Yeah, and Spain is one of the most difficult places I've ever fished. They will. You'll blow them up and they'll be gone.
Just gone.
Like you don't have a chance. Yeah. They're not going to settle back into their spots like a grayling would. So, 2 different kind of approaches there.
Yeah.
That said, grayling, you really have to make several casts on them and do everything perfect. With a wild trout, if you approach them correctly on a European river, let's say it's a wild brown trout. I mean, they come running. They nail it. You got them. So like in a way, you're like, okay, trout are easier than grayling because, as long as you don't, blow them up and spook them by storming in on them or whatever. The trout, they just seem like they're more aggressive than grayling.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a different thing. Like you'll actually go through a section that you're assigned and you'll fish for the trout, first, and then you'll come back through the section and look for the grayling spots, like the holding water for grayling.
All right. There you go. Because they're going to stick around. How do you mentioned perfect cast. I mean, back to that casting, is there any tips, again, so you've got that rod, now you've got a little pot of grayling out there. If you're not doing the plop, like you said, the lob right in close, if you're having to cast a little further out, is there any tips to getting that heavy fly with a long leader to be, and, are you trying to get it within a foot or 2 sort of thing?
Well, most of the nymphing that is done now is kind of hybridized. It's not like short line or super long line. You're kind of going at a mid range, and the leader material is really thin. Like I said, 5X, 6X, and these rods they're long enough now, and they have a crisp enough action to where you can go down pretty far on your bead sizes and still load that bead and shoot it out there.
Oh, cool.
The thing is if you use giant beads, it's really good to start with because it keeps tangles out and it gets your flies down to where the fish are. But at the higher levels of catching fish with European nymphing, the smaller beads that you do, the better oftentimes. So you want your rod to be able to be sensitive enough to basically shoot those smaller beads. So that would be the biggest casting tip I can tell you. And of course your accuracy then gets all off, right? With the smaller beads. It's tough to shoot that without it kind of flinging off to the right or flinging off to the left. So the biggest thing I would tell people is start downsizing your beads and really spend a lot of time on the water trying to make your casts accurate, because that's the name of the game. How many accurate casts can you have?
Right. Right. And is that when you're in a spot, how many casts are you, once you hit that perfect spot, is that pretty much it? One cast to kind of fish it through and then work your way down? Are you trying to systematically breaking that thing within like 6-inch little sections?
Yeah, you're going to do a lot of fly changing in those situations. A lot of times you know where the fish are. Once again, if we're talking grayling, then I'm going to change flies a lot. I'm going to rest that spot. I'm going to keep trying that spot. If you're talking wild trout and you're coming in to a spot that the fish is probably going to eat on the first go through, or it really does depend on. I think I heard Lance talking about this on the other podcast that you did with them.
Yeah.
If you've had someone come in and absolutely just kill the fish, do a great job catching fish, those fish have been caught, or most of them are spooked. So it wouldn't just be the first cast in that situation. You'd have to settle in. So there's so many variables with a lot of this stuff that you're processing all the time. But the more accurate you are, the better, because it's not wasted casts. And also strike detection is another really huge thing, and that's what the newer, more modern rods allow you to do.
Yeah.
You can detect strikes,
either
visually or by feel. Or a combination of both is what I do.
Okay, and is that where with the smaller bead, that's going to be help with your strike detection a little bit versus the bigger stuff? Is that a helpful?
Yeah, that's a good question. The strike detection with a smaller bead, sometimes it's hard to detect the strikes.
Oh, okay.
But the smaller flies oftentimes get the fish to eat better. So
just because they're smaller. And more,
it's not such a giant obnoxious fly coming through there.
Yeah. And what's small? What's a small? Like you think about nymphs and the typical where 16, and smallers are pretty good. It's a good. Are you guys using bigger stuff?
Yeah. So a lot of times you have two nymphs, right? You've got an anchor nymph and you've got a natural nymph. A lot of the smaller natural nymph can be 18, sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we'll oversize the beads though. So you got a small fly with an oversized bead. And that really does a couple different things. It keeps the fly small, so for presentation, but it gives you some of that weight for shooting the fly, to load that rod.
Yeah.
So you get both. You kind of get both there. And then of course your anchor fly can be a little bit heavier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
What about, if we stick on the grayling for a little bit, are there any resources, anything, you want to throw out there, kind of, books, magazines, videos, anything that you don't hear? I guess I don't hear a ton about grayling. I always think of Alaska, but obviously Europe, there must be some stuff out. Is there anything of that, that might help somebody learn a little more about it?
Yeah. When I first started, I would go to I would get magazines actually, like Trout from England, and they focus on grayling a lot there, and you'll read a lot of grayling stories. That's a fantastic resource.
Oh, cool.
And then I went, I did a lot of online searching for articles with the Europeans, and of course you're going to be dealing with the language barrier and that type of stuff. But that just makes it a little more adventurous, I think, trying to figure out the grayling stuff. So yeah, I went to the European resources for that. And, our Alaskan grayling, if you've spent time up there, you're like, okay, now I've caught a few of those.
Yeah. It's not this. It's just, you can just go catch them. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. Where are the rainbows?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I definitely can't let you go before talking a little about Spey, some of the rods. And I was, talking just today, one of the local fly shops, we were talking about Echo, kind of some of the stuff they have going. What thinking about maybe, just think about Echo. Can you tell us just briefly on that story? Do you know the story how Tim got that thing started? And what was Spey? Was that kind of the start? How'd they start? What was their first rods they started with?
I think their first rods were they did incorporate two-handed rods in with the traditional rods
pretty early.
And remember Tim was a rod designer.
Oh, that's right.
For
Loomis.
Yeah,
that's
and so
right.
he and his brother still is a Loomis rod designer, I believe.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so of course, and then he decided to go out on his own. I'm not sure how long ago, but it wasn't. I mean, it was probably
it's been 15 years or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So, I mean, it's just an incredible story. I think one of his original goals was to make really durable rods that people could use that were a great value.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so like when you talk about the Spey, that's really taken off for them. He has designers like Deck Hogan and Mariusz and those guys just amazing casters and anglers. And when you get designers like that, then you're going to get unbelievable products. And then basically you have people kind of looking at different prices of rods and they're like, really, I can get a rod that performs like this, that's durable for a lot less money than maybe other rods, premium rods. I don't. It's a great story. Is what it is. Mm-hmm. And all the credit goes to Tim for having that concept.
Yeah. So anything else you want to talk about just on the rod? I mean, we didn't go really too deep into the rod design. I mean, just to give people a feel for, anything we're missing on the process that might help somebody understand about, when they're selecting their next rod.
Well, one of the things that I'm excited about right now is I've been just finishing up the Stillwater rod series for Echo. And, I kind of designed those with an eye toward Loch Style fishing. Mm-hmm. And of course you do that type of stuff in the competitions. And we just spent this last year designing a series of those Stillwater rods. And that was really, really fun. And I think those are coming out here in the next month. So cool. a whole series of they're actually called Echo Stillwater.
Do you see and I mean you could probably use that not only Loch Style but for other just all around lake fishing?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Do you see more? I'm not as in tune with the Stillwater game right now, but is that Loch Style kind of increasing in popularity, similar to the Euro nymphing stuff?
Not quite at the same pace, but I'll get requests to do Loch Style clinics and stuff. And Stillwater fishing in general is definitely, I think it's the next big thing in fly fishing. The rivers are very, very crowded right now. Once you get out on a lake, you kind of have that instant relief of, wow. So I get this whole 3 square miles to myself. I can see maybe a couple boats on the other side over there, but the impact on the resource is less, we got all those anglers out on rivers. So a lot of times that's tough on the fish. And as I get older, I really truly enjoy sitting in a boat sometimes and drifting with a partner, maybe having a few Coca-Colas and it's sunny out and nice. you're not wading up to your armpits and maybe getting washed down river. I think that the Stillwater fishing is going to be the next big thing in fly fishing because people are looking for places to get away from other people.
Yep.
And Loch Style fishing is a really fun version of that. I was raised just kind of kicking around in a belly boat,
sure,
like dragging woolly buggers around,
yep.
Canada. And Loch Style fishing is incredibly technical. Most people who are into just stillwater fishing in general, but especially Loch Style fishing, they'll tell you that it's more technical than river fishing because of the fact that it's hard to locate the fish and you have so many depths, and basically you're playing this kind of visual game with yourself inside your head, like, where am I? Where's my retrieve? Is there a fish following this?
Right.
Whereas, on a rivers, we kind of, it's like, I know that the fish is sitting right behind that rock.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to focus on them. With stillwater fishing, you're constantly searching for them, and they're moving around. And yeah. I love that part of stillwater fishing.
Can you break down just really briefly? I know, there's a little bit of Loch Style for me, but what Loch Style fishing is on a lake and how it's different from just casting and stripping in flies.
Sure. Like I said before, the style of fishing that I grew up fishing was just kicking around with flippers and dragging my woolly bugger with my dad, and the fishing was so good in Canada that's really all we needed to do. With Loch Style fishing, you're in oftentimes it's kind of a special style boat. Could be a clink style boat, but I use my drift boat, my Clackacraft skiff, and it's amazing for Loch Style fishing. But you have two anglers, and the boat is sideways drifting with the wind, and so you're like, let's say that I'm on the left side of the boat and you're on the right side of the boat. That's my zone. Like mm-hmm. I don't come across like the oar line into yours. At least in the competitions. I mean, we can mess with each other while we're, like, hey, you missed that fish. I'm coming over the top of your line. So there's a lot of camaraderie with it as you're drifting. And basically what you do is you figure out what we call them wind drifts. And like, we have a really cool reservoir here called Magic Reservoir, up by Sun Valley. And I love going there because the drifts are kind of, they're kind of consistent. So I'll motor up. Let's say I've got a small motor on my drift boat. I'll motor up to the top of the lake and set up sideways. And a lot of times we'll use what we call a drogue, which is kind of a sea anchor, Mm-hmm. And we set up on that, and we'll drift this one line that will end up all the way on the other side of the reservoir, and it'll hit a certain point just about every time. And you'll go through pods of fish as you drift. And it's really fun because it's new water all the time. You're, like I said, you're with a partner and you're both casting downwind. The other thing about Loch Style fishing that I love is that it's all hero casting.
Oh, is it?
The wind's at your back.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. So sometimes people will say, like, what type of leader do you use for Loch Style? Like, I use a 20-foot level leader of 2X to 3X. This is a straight leader. Like, well, you can't cast a 20-foot leader. You can when the wind's at your back.
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of cool. And basically what you're doing is you're just covering water and doing retrieves as the boat moves in on your flies. Does that make sense?
Yep. So
yeah. And then it's a really fun deal because you're constantly on the move.
Yeah.
One of the things is you can't fish behind the boat. There's some rules too that dictate what Loch Style fishing is for all the competitions, but you can't fish behind the boat. You can't anchor, and you're constantly moving. So there's a lot of challenges.
What about the area? I mean, in depth, I mean, do you have a certain, are you trying to bay more towards the shore, or are you out in the middle? How's all that work?
Totally depends on the lake.
Yeah.
I mean, you end up knowing what the drifts are. One of the cool things is I was in the World Championships in Scotland, and you go into this pub, and on the wall, like at Loch Leven, this famous loch, they have drifts from the last couple hundred years that are famous.
Huh.
And sure enough, you're going to go park on that because the wind is kind of prevailing usually from the same direction. You're going to set up on that, and you're going to do that same drift that they've got on a poster on the wall. It's just so cool.
That is cool.
And of course, the local knowledge there is so great that they can tell you, like, okay, there's going to be a dip coming up right past that island. The brown trout hang out in that. And so there's a lot of technical stuff.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the things that I really appreciate about Loch Style fishing. And I think that it might catch on a little bit more in the U.S.
Sure.
I know in North America, when I'm up in Canada with like Phil. Did you say you had Phil Rowley on?
Yeah, he was on. Yeah, he covered all the indicator stuff and everything he does.
Yeah, like Phil and Brian Chan up there when we fish together. I go up every year and fish up there. We'll double anchor, which I love. I love that as well. I'm sure Phil covered a lot of that stuff. But double anchoring with indicators and it's just one of those things. Stillwater has all these aspects to it. But Loch Style fishing is something that a lot of people haven't tried, and it's very challenging, and just the fact that you're covering all that water is really fun.
Yeah, I was just trying to track down. We talked about a couple of notes on here. Lance Egan was episode 108, and Phil was way back somewhere in the 30s, I think. But yeah, we've had a little bit, and I had another guest on here, that Denny Rickards, when we were talking about trout feeding and coming into shore, on the lakes, on the still waters, and catching them there. But yeah, so there's I think Stillwater is definitely. I think you're right. I mean, I love the getting out there in the lakes, and I think it probably will increase because it is a lot of times. Yeah, it seems like it's more remote than those rivers for sure.
I think when I guide a lot of people on still waters. I've converted a lot of river anglers to still waters.
Oh, nice.
They tend to, they're kind of blown away. Like they think they're going to maybe like troll or do something really kind of rudimentary, and it's not a lot of thinking. When they see how technical everything is, and obviously the fish size is great, right? The fish are big.
Yeah.
And then they realize that it's kind of an adventure on the lake, scouting all these spots and having all these different plans and strategies. They really love it. So I would strongly encourage your listeners to give Stillwater angling a try, even if you are just a dyed-in-the-wool stream angler. You can really, really have a lot of fun on lakes.
Yeah. And I think I might be setting up a trip maybe next year for. We got the Cascade Lakes out here. I've got somebody I'm talking to. We might have a trip set up, so I'll throw that out there maybe for down the line. So okay, and you noted I think Loon earlier, Airflow. Do you want to note any other? Are those the main companies you kind of?
Yeah, I've been a Clackacraft pro staffer since the very beginning, and I've been in a Clackacraft for 20 plus years now.
Yeah,
love the boat.
Yeah,
just kind of one of those guys in the industry.
Yeah.
You should try the Echo Stillwater when you do get a chance to go out there. They're great rods. They're 10 foot 5s, 10 foot 6s, and 10 foot 7s.
Okay.
There's even a 10.5 foot 6 that for indicator fishing and stuff, which is kind of a cool new concept of a rod. So
what's your so on that boat on the is a drift boat the best for Loch Style fishing? Is that the best type of boat, or is there another one that works?
No, really the best boats are sometimes the handmade boats in Europe. Like in Scotland, we were in Loch Leven, we were in these boats that were giant, super heavy boats that didn't crab. You know what crabbing is, going back and forth.
Oh, right.
Yeah, crabbing is suddenly the guy in the front is rocking forward, and then the guy in the back. Boats will tend to crab, so not every boat is going to work for Loch Style fishing out here, like especially John boats and things like that. But I know that I've done a lot of Loch Style fishing out of different types of drift boats and stuff. And if you don't have a super high bow that gets blown in the wind, like my skiff, I've got a headhunter skiff, and it's great for that. So drift boats do a good job, and prams do a good job, and you basically just have to experiment a little bit with it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so before I get out of here, I got a couple little rapid fire questions for you here.
Sure.
One of them, the first random rapid fire is on. Are you more of a, if you had to choose on the audio stuff, more podcasting or music when you sit down, maybe at the tying table or just hanging out?
I probably mixture of both. Probably music.
Okay.
I would say.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and any band or type of music you want to throw out as your go-to?
I was just a massive classic rock type person from the era that I grew up with, but as far as bands go, I kind of like some of the more modern stuff. This is going to seem kind of weird, but like Thievery Corporation and kind of groovy techno stuff. I kind of like. which is probably pretty strange if you're at a flat tying table.
No, what's what comes to mind first when you think classic rock? What band?
I'm kind of like your average boring Beatles, Rolling Stones, Doors.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that I listen to a lot. And
yep.
Yeah, I'm way into that stuff. Still, always have been since I was 10 years old.
Gotcha. Okay. And can you think of a story? Can you give us a story from your life? It might be fly fishing. Something kind of crazy, anything you think of, and you can either choose something that is either a true story or a completely made up story, and you don't have to tell us. And we're gonna decide for you. Can you come up with something for us? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think I've obviously got several weird fly fishing stories, especially guiding.
Pete, don't tell us if it's true or false. I'm going to let people. We'll see if we can vote with the hashtag Liars Den. So we're going to see if this is going to work for us. So yeah, go for it. Go ahead with the story.
Let me think here. See if I'm making it up or not. So there was a June where some buddies of mine and I we flew into the Connecticut River, Lake Pagadi up there, and we were putting rafts together. We flew in about 10:30 at night, and it was the sun was out, and it was just beautiful. Mm-hmm. And one of the deals that we have to do is pump up the rafts. We were gonna float the Connecticut, and we got to pump up the rafts. That takes a long time, and some of the guys, while they were getting all the stuff out and everything, decided to kind of hang out on the rafts and grab a beer. And I had actually been to the area before, and I knew that there were some creeks that kind of run into the top of this of the Connecticut River up there. And so I decided to grab my dry fly rod and put on a parachute Adams, which, if you've spent enough time in Alaska, you realize you could totally do that in the small creeks that come into the rivers. And so I decide to start walking down river. I'm like, hey guys, I'm going to go see if I can find a couple trout in these creeks down here. And they're like, great. Yeah. Come back when you're ready. We'll have all of the stuff packed up, or maybe we'll just come down and meet you. And we're at the top, so it's probably shin deep water, I would say. A bunch of sockeye kind of running in between my legs and everything. And so I'm walking down, and I'm heading toward this one little corner, and I'm out of sight of the boats now. And I hear this like kind of wood breaking sound, like branches breaking. And I look across the river, and it's pretty wide up at the top. It's probably a football field wide, maybe even more than that at the top of the Connecticut. And next thing I see is a bunch of branches floating in the water, and they're heading down the river. And I'm like, I wonder if a tree fell in. Oh, yeah. But then, it's a bush, so there's no giant trees up there. And I'm like, what is going on here? And the next thing I'm trying to process this from across there, I see this white ball of water, like it's splashing water. Huh. And I'm going, what is going on? What is this? And as I'm standing there watching this, I see this, I see something brown inside the white ball of water, and it's coming toward me really fast. And then, I'm, a second or two later, after the brain fart of what's happening right now, I'm like, oh, that's a giant brown bear, and he's coming toward me at full speed right now.
And just plowing through the water. Just
unbelievable coming through. And I'd been around brown bears before, thrown rocks at them, cleared them out of fishing sites and stuff like that. Yeah. And there was some about this one that I was like, that one's going to maul me. Like I have a feeling this is going to maul me right here. And I did everything wrong. I dropped my rod and started running.
Oh man.
Like I literally started screaming at the top of my lungs, bear, and trying to make it back to the boats, because I know instinctively if you get back to a group of people, a bear usually won't attack you. Yeah. And I'm running as fast as I can. My waders, which must have looked crazy. the bear's catching me so fast, reeling me in so fast. And I finally get to around the corner of where the rafts are, and they've got the raft set up, and they're just kicking back, having a cocktail.
No way.
And I'm like, bear, oh my God. I probably said a few swear words too. And I get to the front of the boat, and we actually had a Mossberg shotgun sitting on there on the boat. And I turn around, and this bear comes around the corner, and he's only now 15 feet behind me.
Damn.
Like he's come that close to me, and the bear stops because it sees the two boats with the multiple people. And I shot a warning shot up in the air.
Wow. And
the bear got up on its hind legs and started just going crazy. Huh. And then it started racing back and forth, and we had buckshot in the first shells in the gun. And then I shot the water in front. I know better than to hit a bear. Yeah. With a
you don't
that's the last thing you want to do is shoot a bear.
Don't shoot him.
You just want to try to scare him off, and this thing just did not want to give up on me. It's just like wanted to eat me, I swear. And so I shot the water in front of him. He raced back and forth about 4 or 5 more times, just super, super pissed off, and then raced into the brush and disappeared. And it was just dead silence. We all looked at each other. And it was like, okay, what just happened?
And everybody was sitting there with their beers just watching this whole thing?
Yeah. And I was like, you guys need to pour me a drink right now.
Damn. that would be
how's that for a story?
That's pretty good. I'll see how this works. So we'll go we'll try a little hashtag Liars Den, LIARSDEN. We'll see if that works, and I'll have you come back down. I'll check back with you a few months or whatever we get this released, and we'll see what people think, if that's a true or a true story or false story from the bear. We've had some bear encounter stories on this, and
have you really?
Oh yeah, I can't think of. There's been a few. I can't even remember the last one. It's been a little while, but so no, that's good. I was gonna also check in with you just on your bucket list. I know we didn't get into any of your travel stuff. You've been all around. Do you have one place left that you really want to get to next?
Yeah, I believe it or not, I haven't been to New Zealand, and guys like Jack Dennis and Jeff Currier just tell me, like, it's just, are you kidding? You haven't been there? I mean, I've fished. I've been to Dubai and Africa, and I fished all over the place. And I, for some reason, haven't had a chance to go there. So that would be my bucket list. Cool. Is definitely to go fish there.
Right on. All right. Well, I'll let you get out here. Just in the next 6 to 12 months, anything new? I guess you mentioned there's the rod, the stillwater rod. Anything else you want to note coming up with you or the companies you work with?
No, the stillwater rod is my main focus right now, and making sure that we get out and promote that. And also the Shadow X is relatively new on the market, and I want to travel around and make it to as many fly shops as possible and do some demos and clinics and stuff for folks. So that's probably my biggest focus right now.
Perfect. All right. Hopefully I'll catch up with you here down the line. I'm definitely going to be promoting, helping get the word out on Echo, and not that they need much help, but I'm looking for, trying to get people that contact me and, they want a good rod and trying to connect them. So I appreciate you shedding some light on everything in the process. And we'll just keep in touch with you as everything moves forward here.
Awesome.
All right, awesome. Pete. Hey, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes, all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/118. A couple of quick notes before we head out of here today. If you haven't seen the resources page, you can head over to wetflyswing.com/resources to see all the products recommended by guests of this podcast and some of our top picks. I want to also remind you this upcoming steelhead season, we've got a summer steelhead trip. If you want to check it out, go to wetflyswing.com/swingthefly for more info. Thanks again for stopping by and check out the show today. Look forward to catching up soon. I hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.